Years ago, I received my doctorate in business, and upon doing that, I conducted a dissertation which studied about 28 companies and 4 countries. And without me going specifically into those 20 countries and those 28 companies in those 4 countries, I want to talk a little bit about just the overall goal of that dissertation. Because it could really relate to a current company and their plans to grow. So what I wanted to study was a firm's intent to grow from international, which to me is a simple definition of a company that is not really challenged by pressures to keep their costs low or pressures for local adaptation. So they call themselves international. And really, to me, that's a rather simplistic strategy of exploiting knowledge and capabilities, and trying your best then to capture those knowledge bases and do well. But when you start to think about pressures to keep the cost low when you go global, or pressures to adapt to local markets, which I call multi-domestic, those are two opposing strategies. Global is a decision to centralize, and multi-domestic is I'm sorry, is a decision to centralize, and a multi-domestic is a decision to decentralize. So let's just look at that. That need to simultaneously achieve global efficiencies, local responsiveness, and organizational learning. All right. So the global integration is central, minimizing costs and leveraging scale, and local responsiveness is decentral, adapting the products and services and marketing to local markets. So how do you approach these two opposing directions? Well, what a company must analyze the relative strength of two forces. These two forces: the pressure for global cost reduction, the centralized decision making. The drivers of that are your price, right? The global price competition is a lot more complex. Sometimes you want to standardize consumer needs, economies of scale in manufacturing. You want to try your best to achieve global supply chain efficiencies, and certain of the situations involve standardization of technology. So companies that you find that are faced with these challenges and are doing well, because of the high pressures just inherent to their industry, are like semiconductor industry, consumer electronics, automotive components. These companies that are involved in these kind of things usually have lower unit cost, duplication of functions, and brand inconsistencies. But it doesn't bother them because there's centralized advantages overcome that. So you know the risks though are reduced local responsiveness and slower response to the regional market. So let's just look at that now. The pressures for local adaptation usually move you more towards decentralized decision making. And those drivers are like cultural differences, language and consumer preferences, the differences of distribution channels. Some of those industries are like food and beverage, retail, healthcare, media and entertainment. Those industries do their best to take advantage of stronger customer alignment, regulatory compliance, and faster market responsiveness. But here are the risks there. There are most certainly higher operating costs. Most certainly higher operating costs. All right. So when you look at the four classical internet international strategies, then the beginning one is, as I said, international, where the pressures for local adaptation and for responsive and cost reduction is low. Both of those are low, and it's very headquarters driven. Global, then there's a little more pressure on the global side for keeping the cost down. Very, very high pressure to keep the cost down, but not concerned about local responsiveness. And so it's very centralized decision making. Multi-domestic, as I pointed out, where the um, pressure to keep the cost low is low, but the high pressure here is local adaptation. So that usually involves subsidiaries, decentralized subsidiaries. So what my research found is that the ultimate endpoint is transnational. If you could get to transnational, where you're managing both of those pressures, pressures to keep the costs low and pressures to respond to local markets, what you have is what I call a networked organization. A networked organization. The problem, however, still remains. What kind of a network? How do we design the organizational architecture? Do we want to be more concerned about the global headquarters responsible for corporate strategy and global procurement, or are we looking at the regional hubs responsible for market adaptation and regional marketing? Just how do we balance the centralization versus local authority? How do we align culture with leadership, right? Leadership competencies of cross cultural communication, distributed leadership, and collaboration across boundaries. So, my master's, before I got my doctorate in business, I looked at global ERP systems, enterprise resource planning systems, looking at supply chain platforms, cloud collaboration tools, and digital governance frameworks. I found that if done right, you could create technologies that enable coordination without excessive centralization. Without excessive centralization. Right? A successful transnational firm becomes an integrated network of specialized subsidiaries rather than headquarters controlling distant branches. Hope this makes sense. Just kind of trying to summarize 5 years worth of doctoral research and somewhat updated to today's companies too. So even though that research was dated, I think the lessons are still relevant today for companies that want to manage a transnational market. Thank you for listening. I am Dr.